The timer on the oven had been silent for a good 45 minutes. I just stared at it, the little red numbers frozen at 6:17, which was the time I had set it to go off. The lasagna was probably a brick of rubbery cheese and dried-out pasta by now, but I didn't have the energy to get up and check. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. Mark was late. Again. It had become a pattern over the last 6 months, a creeping shift in the rhythm of our evenings. He used to be home by 5:30 sharp. We would have a drink, I'd be finishing up dinner, and we'd talk about our days. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. Now he came and went like a ghost, always distracted, always looking at his phone, and always with that thin-lipped, pinched expression that told me he had something on his mind he wasn't ready to share. I was just about to push my chair back and scrape the whole pan into the trash when I heard the key turn in the lock. It wasn't the usual cheerful rattle of keys and the bang of the door. It was a quiet, deliberate click, and then the deadbolt sliding back slowly, as if he was trying not to make a sound. I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap. The kitchen light was bright, and I could see the reflection of the hallway in the window above the sink. I saw his shadow move, but he didn't come straight in. There was a pause. A beat of silence that seemed to stretch into minutes. Then he walked into the kitchen, and his face told me everything I needed to know. Mark looked like a man who had just seen a car accident. His face was pale, a waxy kind of pale that made the dark circles under his eyes look like bruises. His tie was loose, his collar unbuttoned, and his hair, usually neatly combed, was sticking up at the back as if he'd been running his hands through it. In his hands, he was carrying a thick, brown accordion folder, the kind you see in old movies, with a flap and a little string to tie it shut. It was heavy. He was holding it with both hands, and he set it down on the table with a dull, resonant thud that made the salt shaker jump. "What's that?" I asked, my voice coming out flatter than I intended. He didn't answer. He just pulled out his chair and sat down opposite me, right where he was supposed to be an hour ago. He stared at the folder, his hands resting on either side of it like it was a bomb he was about to defuse. "Mark, you're scaring me," I said, a little sharper this time. "What is in that folder?" He looked up at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the man I married, the one who used to get a goofy grin on his face when he surprised me with flowers. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same haunted look. "It's about your father," he said. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in hours. "My father, Arthur, had died 3 months ago. A heart attack," the doctors said. He was 72, a quiet man, a retired accountant for the county. He had a set routine. He woke up at 6, made his own coffee, read the paper from front to back, and spent his afternoons tending to his roses in the backyard. His world was small, orderly, and predictable. I had been to his house to clear out his study with my mother. I hadn't found a stray paperclip out of place. Everything was in its box, labeled in his neat, tiny handwriting. I had thought that was the end of it. "What about my father?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. Mark ran a hand over his thinning hair, a nervous habit he had developed in the last few years. "He wasn't just an accountant, Lisa. He was more than that. A lot more." He reached for the string on the folder and untied it with trembling fingers. He opened the flap, and I saw a thick wad of papers inside. Bank statements, property deeds, photocopies of letters, and a few photographs I couldn't see clearly from where I was sitting. I didn't move. I didn't want to see. But he pulled out a document and slid it across the table to me. "Look," he said. "This is a deed to a company. Redmond and Sons. It's a logistics company based out of the city. And look at the founding date. It was established 32 years ago." I read the fine print. The name of the founder was Arthur Redmond. My father's name. My maiden name. My father, the county employee who had a heart attack 3 months ago, had owned a logistics company for over 3 decades. I had never heard the name Redmond and Sons in my entire life. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He worked for the county. He had a pension. We were a simple family. We never had money for a company. We struggled to pay for my college tuition." "That's what I thought," Mark said quietly. "But look at this." He slid another document across the table. This one was a bank statement. It was from a bank in the Cayman Islands. The balance on it was more than I could ever make in my entire life. It was a figure with so many zeros it made my eyes cross. This is impossible, I said, shaking my head. This has to be a mistake. Someone forged his name. This isn't my father. My father fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom with duct tape and drove a 15-year-old sedan. He didn't have money like this. Mark nodded slowly, as if he had expected me to say that. He took a breath, the kind of deep, ragged breath someone takes before they deliver bad news. Then he pulled out a third document. This one was a life insurance policy. A policy worth a lot of money. Look at the beneficiary, he said. I looked. My eyes scanned down the page, past the legalese, past the policy number, and landed on the name. It wasn't my name. It wasn't my mother's name. It was a name I had never seen before in my life. Mrs. Celia Vance. I stared at it. I read it over and over again, as if saying the words out loud would make them make sense. My father had taken out a life insurance policy worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he hadn't left it to his wife or his daughter. He had left it to a woman I had never met. A woman named Celia Vance. Who is she? I asked, my voice hollow. I don't know, Mark said. I tried to look her up. I tried to find her. She's not in the phone book. She doesn't have an internet presence. She's either a ghost or she's using a different name now. But the policy is valid. He's been paying the premiums on it for years. I pushed the papers away from me. I couldn't look at them anymore. My stomach was turning. My father, the quiet man, the meticulous man, the man who clipped coupons and paid his bills in cash, had a secret. A huge, life-altering secret. He had a secret fortune. He had a secret life. And he had a secret woman. It was a betrayal so complete, so calculated, that it felt like a physical blow to my chest. How did you find this? I asked, my voice trembling. Why do you have this? Mark looked away, his jaw tightening. I was doing some work for a client, he said slowly. A financial review. And some of the documents they gave me were flagged in the system. They cross-referenced your father's name. Your maiden name. I thought it was a coincidence at first, a different Arthur Redmond, but then I dug deeper. And I found all of this. I stared at him. I looked at his face, at the guilty way he was staring at the table, at the way his hands were clenched into fists. A cold, creeping suspicion began to form in my mind. It wasn't just the betrayal of my father that I was feeling. It was a new, sharper pain. Because Mark was a financial analyst. He was a detail-oriented, cautious man. He didn't just stumble upon something like this. You've known about this, haven't you? I said, my voice rising. You've known for longer than tonight. He didn't deny it. He just sat there, his silence confirming my worst fears. How long, Mark? I demanded. How long have you been keeping this from me, Lisa? I didn't want to hurt you, he said, finally looking up. You had just lost your father. You were grieving. I didn't want to dump this on you. But you're dumping it on me now. I shouted, standing up. I knocked my chair back, and it scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. You're dumping it on me now, in the middle of the night, when I'm supposed to be eating dinner. Why? What changed? Why did you wait until now to tell me? He flinched at my anger. He looked down at the folder again, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. A cold, genuine fear that I had never seen in his face before. Because they know, he said. The people who run that company, they know I found out. They've been calling me. They've been watching me. His voice broke. I was late because I was trying to make sure I wasn't followed home, Lisa. I didn't want to bring this to your doorstep. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, the cold air from the kitchen window chilling my skin, and I felt my entire world crumbling around me. My father was a stranger. My husband was a liar. And there were people out there, faceless, nameless people, who were threatening my life. I stared at Mark, at the fear in his eyes, and I realized that the man I had married, the man I had trusted with everything, had just become a part of the conspiracy. He wasn't my ally in this fight. He was the one who had opened the door and let it in. What did they say to you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What do they want? Mark just shook his head. I don't know, he said. But it's not just about the money, Lisa. It's not just about the money. There's more. A lot more. He reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of my father, much younger than I had ever known him, standing in front of a warehouse, smiling. He was standing next to a man I had never seen before, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. There was a name on the back of the photograph, written in my father's handwriting. Frank Holloway. I had never heard that name before, but Mark had. I could see it in the way he looked at it, the way his face went even paler. He knew who Frank Holloway was. And the fact that he was connected to my father, the fact that my father had known him, was a secret that Mark had been trying to keep for years. Who is he? I asked, my voice trembling. Who is Frank Holloway? Mark opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. He just stared at me, his eyes full of a guilt so deep it made me sick to my stomach. The betrayal I felt was no longer just about my father. It was about my own home, my own marriage. The foundation of my life had been a lie, and I was only just beginning to see how deep the cracks went. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Mark tossed and turned beside me. He had tried to explain more, to tell me about the phone calls and the men in the black cars who seemed to be parked outside our house, but the words had dried up in his throat. He was scared, and his fear was more contagious than any cold. I felt it seeping into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. When the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I was going to see my mother. I needed answers from her. If my father had been living a double life, she had to have known. She lived in the same house for 40 years. She managed his clothes, his meals, his schedule. A secret like a company and a fortune couldn't hide from a wife's eyes. It just couldn't. I got out of bed quietly. Mark was still asleep, his face looking haggard and old in the early morning light. I didn't wake him. I didn't know what to say to him anymore. I just left a note on the kitchen counter saying I had gone out. It was a lie, but it was a small one, and right now, the big lies were the ones that were eating me alive. I drove to my mother's house on autopilot. It was a 15-minute drive through streets I had known my whole life. The old oak tree at the corner of Maple Avenue was still there. The corner store where I used to buy candy as a kid had become a yoga studio. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. The world had shifted on its axis, and I was stumbling through it, blind and disoriented. My mother's house was a modest bungalow with a sagging porch and chipped paint on the window frames. My father had always promised to fix it, but he never got around to it. Now he never would. I parked my car in the driveway, right next to her old Buick, and I sat there for a long moment, staring at the front door. I could see the lace curtains in the living room window twitching. She knew I was here. I walked up the creaky porch steps and knocked. The door swung open almost immediately, as if she had been standing right behind it. My mother, Helen, stood there, her hair a perfect silver wave, her face arranged in a mask of calm composure. She was wearing a floral dress and a cardigan, even though it was a warm morning. She was always cold. She was always put together. She was always in control. "Lisa," she said, her voice carrying the faintest note of surprise, as if I had just teleported into her living room. "What a nice surprise. I wasn't expecting you." She stepped aside to let me in. I walked past her into the familiar living room. It was exactly as I remembered it. The floral sofa, the glass coffee table with the coaster set in a neat row, the china cabinet filled with teacups that never got used. The smell of lavender and old wood filled the air. It smelled like my childhood. It smelled like safety. But I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was walking into a trap. "Come, sit down," my mother said, gesturing to the sofa. "I'll make you some tea. You look tired, darling." "Are you sleeping well?" "No, Mom," I said, sitting down heavily. "I'm not sleeping well. I have a lot on my mind." She didn't ask what. She just disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard the familiar sounds of the kettle being filled and the clink of teacups. I sat there, staring at the china cabinet, and I thought about all the secrets this house must have held over the years. All the lies that had been told in this very room. My mother came back with a tray. She set it down on the coffee table with a practiced grace and poured me a cup of tea. Her hand was steady as a rock. She didn't spill a single drop. "There you go, dear," she said, handing me the cup. Now, tell me what's bothering you. I took a sip of the tea. It was scalding hot, and it burned my throat, but I didn't care. I needed something to burn away the numbness that was settling over me. I need to ask you something, I said. And I need you to be honest with me. My mother's smile faltered for just a second, a tiny crack in the mask. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same serene expression. Of course, dear. I'm always honest with you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the accordion folder. I had brought it with me. I had brought a copy of every document Mark had shown me. I set it down on the coffee table, right in the middle of the neat little row of coasters. I found this, I said. Mark found it, actually. It's about Dad. My mother looked at the folder. She didn't touch it. She didn't even move. She just stared at it as if it were a snake that might strike at any moment. I don't want to see that, she said, her voice flat. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to know. Mom, please, I said, my voice cracking. It's about Dad's other life. The company. The money. The woman. My mother's face went still. It was a strange, unsettling stillness, like a pond that had just frozen over. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She just stared at me with those pale blue eyes, and in that moment, she looked like a stranger. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said. Your father was a good man. A good provider. He worked hard for the county, and he gave us a comfortable life. That's all there is to it. Mom, I saw the documents, I said, my voice rising. I saw the bank statements. I saw the insurance policy. He left hundreds of thousands of dollars to a woman named Celia Vance. Who is she? Was he having an affair? My mother's hand tightened on her teacup. Her knuckles went white. She looked down at the tea, swirled it gently, and took a sip. When she looked up again, her eyes were cold. Your father and I had an understanding, she said. He gave me a good life. A comfortable life. And in return, I gave him his privacy. That's how a marriage works, Lisa. You don't poke around in the corners. You don't dig up the past. I stared at her, my mouth hanging open. She knew. She had known about the money, about the company, about Celia Vance. She had known all along, and she had chosen to look the other way. The quiet, passive woman I called my mother wasn't innocent. She was a co-conspirator. She had been keeping this secret for decades. You knew, I whispered. You knew about all of it. My mother set down her teacup with a sharp click. I knew what I needed to know, she said. And I know what I don't need to know. And I don't need to know any of this. Your father is dead. Let him rest. Let the past stay buried. Buried, I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. The past isn't buried, Mom. It's right here. It's on my kitchen table. It's in my husband's files. It's following me around like a ghost. And you knew. You knew, and you let me live my whole life thinking we were just a normal, boring family. My mother stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, the very garden my father used to tend. Her back was to me, her shoulders ramrod straight. Your father had a burden, she said, her voice quiet and controlled. He carried it so that we wouldn't have to. He made choices, hard choices, to protect this family. And I respected that. I honored that. And I will not let you drag his name through the mud just because you're curious. I stood up too. I was shaking. This isn't about curiosity, Mom. This is about truth. This is about my life. Mark is being threatened. People are watching our house. And the company, Redmond and Sons, it's connected to my old job. My boss knew about it. They fired me because of it. Because of Dad's secret. It's not just a secret anymore. It's a weapon. My mother turned to face me. For a moment, her composure slipped, and I saw a flash of something raw and painful in her eyes. Was it fear, guilt, regret? I couldn't tell. You lost your job, she asked, her voice softening. Because of him, I said. Because of Dad. Because of the name Redmond. They think I'm a part of it. They think I'm like him. A fraud. A liar. My mother walked back to me and took my hands in hers. Her hands were cold, so cold, like she had just been holding ice. Lisa, listen to me, she said, her voice low and urgent. You have to let this go. You have to forget about the folder, forget about the money, forget about everything. Burn it. Throw it away. Bury it. Just like your father did. If you don't, they will destroy you. They will destroy everything you love. Who will? I asked, pulling my hands away. Who are they, Mom? Who is Frank Holloway? My mother's face went pale. She stepped back from me, her hands dropping to her sides. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw a deep, abiding fear that I had never seen before. It was the same fear I had seen in Mark's eyes the night before. Go home, Lisa, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Go home and forget about this. Please. For your own good. I stood there, staring at my mother, this woman I had known my whole life, and I realized I didn't know her at all. She was a stranger. They were all strangers. My father, my husband, my mother. The people I had trusted most in the world had been keeping secrets from me for decades. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out of the house and got into my car. I drove to a nearby park and sat in the parking lot, staring at the empty swings, my mind reeling. My mother's denial had been more painful than the truth. It meant she knew. She knew about the money, about the other woman, about the company, and she had accepted it. She had buried it deep inside, just like my father had buried his secrets in that accordion folder. And now, because of their choices, my life was falling apart. I went to work the next day. I had to. I needed the normalcy. I needed to pretend that everything was okay, that my life hadn't been turned upside down. I walked into the office, past the receptionist, past the rows of cubicles, and I sat down at my desk. I tried to focus on my emails, on the project deadlines, on the mundane tasks that used to fill my days. But the peace didn't last. Around 10 in the morning, I got a call from my boss. Mr. Hale. His voice was clipped, businesslike. Lisa, can you come to my office? We need to have a meeting. Bring your calendar. I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked to his office, and when I opened the door, I saw that he wasn't alone. Ben was there. Ben, the eager, junior accountant who had been circling my position like a shark. He was sitting in the chair across from Mr. Hale's desk, a little smirk on his face. Sit down, Lisa, Mr. Hale said. He didn't look at me. He was staring at a folder on his desk, a folder that looked suspiciously familiar. I sat down. My heart was pounding. Ben was watching me with a gleam in his eye. We've discovered a discrepancy in the budget for the Northwood School project, Mr. Hale said. A substantial sum of money was reallocated to a shell company. We've done a preliminary investigation, and we've traced the transfer back to you. I stared at him, my mouth going dry. That's impossible, I said. I didn't reallocate any money. I don't have access to the company accounts like that. That's not what the records show, Ben said, leaning forward. The records show that you authorized the transfer. The shell company is called Redmond & Sons. My blood ran cold. I looked at Ben's face, at the smirk that was now a full-blown smile, and I understood. He had done this. He had planted the evidence. He had framed me. Lisa, Mr. Hale said, his voice heavy with disappointment. We also did a background check on your maiden name. Redmond & Sons was founded by an Arthur Redmond. Is that your father? I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The betrayal was complete. My father's secret had followed me into my workplace, and the people I had trusted, the people I had worked alongside for years, had turned on me. I'm sorry, Lisa, Mr. Hale said. But I have to let you go. This is a clear violation of company policy. Security will escort you out. I sat there frozen. Ben was smiling now, a triumphant smile that made me sick to my stomach. I looked at Mr. Hale, at the pity in his eyes, and I realized that he knew too. He was a part of it. They were all a part of it. And Mark, my husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, had been the one to open the door and let them in. He was the mole in my life, the one who had fed them the information they needed to destroy me. I stood up slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at Mr. Hale and said, "You're making a mistake." And I walked out of the office, my head held high, my life in ashes at my feet. The walk out of the office was the longest walk of my life. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on my back, their whispers following me like a trail of smoke. Some of them looked shocked. Some of them looked pitying. And some of them, the ones who had never liked me, looked smug. I kept my head up, my shoulders straight, and I didn't look back. I had too much pride for that. The security guard, A heavy-set man named Frank, who usually nodded at me in the mornings, wouldn't meet my eyes. He just walked me to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and stood there in silence until the doors slid shut. I was alone in the elevator, watching the numbers count down, and I felt a sob building in my chest. But I swallowed it down. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. When I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat and just stared at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even turn the key in the ignition. I took a deep breath, then another, and I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Ben had framed me. Ben, the junior accountant with the eager smile and the hungry eyes, had set me up. He had planted evidence, made it look like I had stolen money from the company and funneled it to a shell company. My father's shell company. The name Redmond and Sons was going to haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a curse, a stain that had followed me from my father's grave into my own career. I had worked at Hartfield's for 8 years. 8 years of late nights, early mornings, and endless meetings. 8 years of building a reputation, of earning trust, of climbing the ladder. And in one morning, it was all gone. Erased. Because of a secret my father had taken to his grave. I finally turned the key and drove home. The house felt different when I walked in. It felt cold and empty, even though the sun was shining through the kitchen windows. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock in the hallway, the distant sound of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly the same. But I was different. My world had crumbled, and I was standing in the rubble. I went to the kitchen and saw the accordion folder sitting on the table where I had left it. It was like a black hole, sucking all the light out of the room. I picked it up and held it in my hands. It was heavy. Heavy with secrets, heavy with lies, heavy with everything my father had hidden from me. I wanted to throw it in the trash. I wanted to burn it. I wanted to pretend I had never seen it. But I couldn't. The truth was out. And there was no putting it back in the box. That evening, Mark came home. He walked through the door with the same quiet, guilty expression he had worn the night before. He looked at me sitting at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, and he knew. He knew what had happened. "Lisa," he said, his voice soft. "I heard. I'm so sorry." I looked up at him. "You heard? How did you hear? Are you still talking to them? Are you still feeding them information?" He flinched. "No, Lisa. I swear. I didn't know they were going to do that. I didn't know they were going to frame you. That was Ben. Ben did that on his own. He was trying to get your job." "He got my job," I said, my voice flat. "He got my job. And you helped him. You gave them the name. You told them about Redmond and Sons. You told them about my father." Mark opened his mouth to deny it, but the words didn't come. He knew I was right. He had opened the door. He had let them in. And now I was the one paying the price. "I was trying to protect us," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought if I gave them the name, they would back off. I thought they would leave us alone. I didn't think they would use it against you. You didn't think." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You didn't think you're a financial analyst, Mark. You think about numbers all day. You calculate risks. You project outcomes. And you didn't think that giving them ammunition against me would blow up in my face." He couldn't look at me. He just stood there, staring at the floor, his hands hanging limp at his sides. I had never seen him look so defeated. And yet, I couldn't find it in my heart to pity him. He had brought this on us. He had betrayed me, and he had betrayed my father's memory. "I'm moving out," he said, his voice flat. "I think I need some space. I think we both need some space." I stared at him. "You're running away," I said. "Just like you ran away from the truth. You're leaving me here to deal with this mess on my own." "I'm not running away," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm going to stay with my mother for a while. I need to think. We need to think. About what comes next." I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. I just watched him go into the bedroom and pack a bag. He didn't take much. A few suits, some toiletries, a book he had been reading. He walked past me without saying goodbye, and the door clicked shut behind him. I heard his car start up in the driveway, and then the sound faded away. And I was alone. The silence was deafening. I spent the next week in a daze. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't answer the phone. I just sat in the house, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of my life. My mother called multiple times. I let it go to voicemail. Mark's lawyer called. He was looking for a settlement, a way to divide our assets. A divorce. He was already talking about a divorce. The man who had promised to love me through sickness and health was filing papers, and he hadn't even had the decency to tell me himself. One afternoon, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove to my mother's house. I needed to confront her. I needed to force her to tell me the truth. I parked in her driveway and walked up to the front door, my heart pounding. I didn't knock. I just opened the door and walked in. My mother was sitting in her armchair, a book in her lap. She looked up when I walked in, and her face went pale. "Lisa," she said. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because I need answers," I said. "And you're going to give them to me. No more lies. No more secrets. Tell me everything." My mother set down her book. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with a weary expression. "I already told you," she said. "There's nothing to tell. Your father was a good man." "Stop it," I shouted. "Stop pretending. I know he wasn't a good man. He was a fraud. He was a liar. He had a secret company, a secret fortune, and a secret woman. And you knew. You knew all of it. You helped him hide it." My mother's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked old and fragile, like a porcelain doll that was about to shatter. But then she straightened her shoulders, and the mask slipped back into place. "Your father did what he had to do," she said. "He made choices that protected this family. And yes, I knew. I knew about the company. I knew about the money. I knew about Celia Vance. But I also knew that he loved me. He loved us. And he did everything he could to give us a good life." "What kind of life?" I asked, my voice cracking. "A life built on lies, a life built on stolen money, a life where your own husband is a stranger." My mother stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden, just like she had before. "You want to know the truth?" she said, her voice quiet. "Fine. The truth is that your father was a partner in a company that moved money for powerful people. People like Frank Holloway. He didn't want to do it. But he was young, and he was desperate, and the money was too good to refuse. He thought he could get out. But once you're in with people like that, you never get out." I stared at her back. "So he was a criminal," I said. "He was a money launderer." My mother turned around. There were tears in her eyes. "He was a man who made mistakes," she said. "Terrible mistakes. But he was also a man who loved his family. He kept the money separate from us. He kept it hidden. He built a wall between that life and this life, and he spent every day trying to make sure it never touched us." "But it did touch us," I said. "It touched me. It destroyed my career. It destroyed my marriage. It's following me like a ghost. And now I'm being threatened by people I don't even know because of his mistakes." My mother walked toward me and took my hands. Her hands were cold, just like they had been before. "I know, Lisa," she said. "And I'm so sorry. I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to be dragged into it. That's why I didn't tell you. I wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked, pulling my hands away. "From the truth, from the fact that my father was a criminal, from the fact that my mother was complicit in his crimes." My mother looked away. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like a broken woman. "I loved him," she said. "I loved him more than anything. And I knew that if I pushed him, if I forced him to confess, I would lose him. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him." I felt a wave of anger wash over me. "So instead, you lost me," I said. "You lost your daughter. Because you chose to protect a lie." My mother looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. "Lisa, please," she said. "Please don't do this. We're family. We have to stick together." "Family?" I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "You don't know what family means. You and Dad, you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You kept me in the dark my whole life. And now I'm paying the price for your secrets." I walked out of the house without looking back. I could hear my mother calling my name, but I didn't stop. I got in my car and drove away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. I ended up at a park on the outskirts of town, the same park where I had sat before. I parked my car and just sat there, staring at the empty playground. I thought about my father, about the man I thought I knew. I thought about my mother, about the secrets she had kept. I thought about Mark, about the betrayal that had shattered my marriage. And I thought about myself, about the woman I had become, a woman who had been lied to by everyone she loved. But sitting there in the quiet of the park, something shifted inside me. The anger was still there, burning hot in my chest. But underneath the anger, there was something else. Resolve. I was tired of being a victim. I was tired of being lied to. I was tired of being used and discarded by the people who were supposed to love me. My father had left behind a trail of secrets. But he had also left behind a trail of evidence. And I was going to follow that trail no matter where it led. I was going to find out the truth about Frank Holloway. I was going to find out who was behind the threats. And I was going to clear my name. I started the car and drove home. When I got there, I went straight to the accordion folder. I opened it and started going through the documents, line by line. There had to be something in there, some clue, some thread that would unravel the whole tangled mess. I pulled out the property deeds and studied them. The warehouse on the outskirts of town. The one where my father had kept his files. I hadn't been there yet. I hadn't had the courage. But now I knew I had to go. I got up and grabbed my coat. I was going to that warehouse. I was going to see for myself what my father had left behind. I didn't know what I would find. But I knew I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The warehouse was on the edge of the city, a forgotten stretch of land near the old rail yards. I had driven past it 100 times without ever really seeing it. It was a squat, gray building with corrugated metal walls and a roof that sagged in the middle like an old man's back. The windows were grimy, caked with decades of dust and grime. A faded sign above the loading bay door read Redmond and Sons in peeling paint. I parked my car a block away. I didn't want anyone to see me. I didn't know who might be watching. I got out and walked toward the warehouse, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. The air smelled like rust and diesel fuel. A train horn sounded in the distance, a mournful wail that echoed across the empty lots. The gate at the front of the warehouse was locked with a heavy chain and a padlock. But I had come prepared. I had found the spare key in my father's desk, tucked behind a loose panel in the back of the top drawer. I had never known it was there. I had never known a lot of things. I unlocked the padlock and pushed the gate open. It groaned on rusty hinges. I stepped inside and walked across the cracked concrete toward the main door. The key for that door was on the same ring. I slipped it into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The inside of the warehouse was dark and musty. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the grimy windows near the ceiling. I squinted, letting my eyes adjust. The space was vast, filled with old wooden crates and metal shelving units that were covered in cobwebs. It looked abandoned. It looked like no one had been here in years. But I knew better. My father had been here. He had hidden his secrets here. And I was determined to find them. I walked deeper into the warehouse, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I passed row after row of shelving units, each one stacked with old boxes and rusted tools. I didn't see anything that looked like an office. I was starting to think I had come to the wrong place when I noticed a door at the back of the warehouse, half hidden behind a stack of wooden pallets. I moved the pallets aside and tried the door. It was unlocked. I opened it and found myself in a small, cramped office. There was a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a swivel chair that was missing one of its wheels. A faded calendar from 5 years ago hung on the wall. It was a room frozen in time. I walked to the desk and sat down in the chair. The surface was covered in a thin layer of dust. I opened the drawers one by one. The top drawer was empty. The middle drawer had a few pens and a roll of tape. But the bottom drawer was locked. I searched the desk for a key. I checked the pencil holder, the back of the calendar, the bottom of the chair. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed a small crack in the floorboard beneath the desk. I knelt down and pried the board loose with my fingers. Underneath was a small metal box, the kind used to store important documents. I pulled the box out and set it on the desk. It was locked too, but the lock was cheap and flimsy. I found a screwdriver in one of the drawers and pried it open. Inside were a stack of ledgers and a folder filled with old photographs. I pulled out the ledgers first. They were thick, bound in leather, with yellowed pages covered in my father's tiny, neat handwriting. I opened the first one and started reading. It was a record of transactions. Dates, names, amounts. It was all here. Every payment, every bribe, every favor. My father had been keeping meticulous records for decades. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. The names were mostly unfamiliar, but a few of them jumped out at me. Frank Holloway, Stuart Matthews, Mr. Hale, my old boss. They were all connected. They had all been paid. My father had been a middleman, a broker of favors. He had moved money for powerful people, and he had kept a record of every single transaction. I set the ledgers aside and opened the folder of photographs. The first one was a group shot. My father was in the middle, smiling, his arm around a man I didn't recognize. The man was tall, with sharp features and cold eyes. He was wearing an expensive suit. On the back of the photograph, in my father's handwriting, was a name. Frank Holloway. I stared at the photograph, my mind racing. This was the man who had been threatening my husband. This was the man who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. He looked like a businessman, a successful one. But I knew better. He was a criminal. And my father had worked for him. I set the photograph down and reached for the ledgers again. I needed to find a connection. I needed to find a thread that would unravel the whole tangled web. I flipped through the pages, scanning the names and dates. And then I saw it. A payment. A large sum of money, transferred to a shell company called Hartfield Holdings. The date on the transaction was just a few months ago, 2 weeks before I was fired. I stared at the page, my mind reeling. Hartfield Holdings. The name was almost identical to the company I had worked for. It was a shell company, a front for the corruption that had been running through my old job. And my father had been a part of it. He had been facilitating the payments, keeping the money flowing, keeping the secrets buried. My hands were shaking. I felt sick to my stomach. The betrayal was so complete, so cold, that I couldn't breathe. My father had been a part of the machine that had crushed me. He had built it. He had kept it running. And he had never told me. He had never given me a chance to protect myself. I was still sitting there, staring at the ledger, when I heard a noise. A creak. It came from the main warehouse. I froze, my heart pounding. I listened, straining to hear any other sounds. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. And then I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming toward the office door. I panicked. I shoved the ledgers and the photographs back into the metal box and locked it. I looked around for a place to hide. There was a small closet in the corner of the office. I grabbed the box and slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind me. I crouched in the darkness, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear the footsteps growing closer. They stopped just outside the office door. I held my breath, praying that whoever it was would just go away. The door swung open. I could see a sliver of light through the crack in the closet door. A figure walked into the office. It was a man. He was tall, wearing a dark coat. I couldn't see his face. He walked to the desk and stood there, surveying the room. I could hear him breathing. He was looking for something. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible. The man moved closer to the closet door. I could see his shoes, polished leather, inches away from where I was hiding. I stopped breathing. I stopped thinking. I just waited. And then the phone rang. The man swore under his breath. He pulled a cell phone out of his pocket and answered it. Yeah, he said. No, I didn't find anything. The place is clean. Someone must have already been here. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was talking about me. He knew someone had been here. He was looking for the ledgers, for the evidence my father had left behind. I'll check the office again, he said. And then I'll sweep the warehouse. If there's anything here, I'll find it. He ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket. He started rifling through the desk drawers, pulling them open one by one. I heard him muttering under his breath. He was getting frustrated. He wasn't finding what he was looking for. I clutched the metal box tighter to my chest. I couldn't let him find it. I couldn't let him take it. It was the only proof I had. The man stopped rifling through the drawers. He stood still for a moment, and I could feel him looking around the room. His gaze passed over the closet door. I was sure he was going to open it. I was sure he was going to find me. But then, to my surprise, he turned and walked out of the office. I heard his footsteps retreating across the warehouse floor. The door swung shut, and I was alone again. I stayed in the closet for a long time, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I was too afraid to move. I was too afraid to breathe. I waited and waited, until I was sure the man was gone. Slowly, I pushed the closet door open. The office was empty. The warehouse was silent. I crept out of the closet and walked to the door. I peered out into the warehouse. There was no one there. The man was gone. I didn't wait. I grabbed the metal box and ran. I ran through the warehouse, past the shelving units, past the crates, past the loading bay. I burst out the door and didn't stop until I reached my car. I threw the box into the passenger seat and started the engine. I drove away from the warehouse as fast as I could, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I was terrified that the man would follow me. I was terrified that he would find me. I drove all the way home and locked myself inside the house. I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, the metal box in my lap. I was shaking. I was crying. I was terrified. But I also had the evidence. I had the ledgers. I had the photographs. I had the proof I needed to expose Frank Holloway and everyone else who had been a part of my father's secret life. I knew what I had to do. I had to go to the police. I had to show them what I had found. It was the only way to clear my name. It was the only way to get justice. But I also knew that going to the police was dangerous. The man in the warehouse had been looking for these documents. He had been willing to hurt me to get them. I was putting myself at risk. I was putting my life on the line. I sat there on the kitchen floor, holding the metal box in my hands, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I wasn't going to let my father's secrets destroy me. I was going to fight back. I was going to expose the truth. And I was going to take back my life. I got up, walked to the phone, and dialed the number for the state attorney general's office. It was the only number I could think of. The only number that might be able to help me. I took a deep breath and waited for someone to answer. The woman on the other end of the line sounded tired. Her voice was flat, professional, like she had answered 1,000 calls like mine. I told her my name, told her I had evidence of financial crimes involving a man named Frank Holloway, and told her I needed to speak to someone in person. She put me on hold for what felt like an eternity, and when she came back, she told me to come to the office the next morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights on, the metal box on the coffee table in front of me, and I watched the shadows move outside the window. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every passing car made me hold my breath. I was terrified that the man from the warehouse had followed me home. I was terrified that Frank Holloway's people were watching my house, waiting for me to make a move. But I didn't let the fear stop me. I had come too far to turn back now. The next morning, I drove to the state attorney general's office. It was a modern building in the downtown area, all glass and steel. I walked through the revolving doors and approached the security desk. I told the guard I had an appointment, and he directed me to a waiting area on the 3rd floor. I sat in the waiting area for almost an hour. The chairs were uncomfortable, the carpet was drab, and the air smelled like stale coffee. I watched people come and go, lawyers in sharp suits, assistants carrying stacks of files. I felt out of place, like a fish out of water. I was just a woman who had lost her job and her husband. What was I doing here? Finally, a woman came out to get me. She was in her 40s, with tired eyes and a sensible haircut. She introduced herself as Detective Miller. She shook my hand and led me to a small conference room. The room was bare except for a table and a few chairs. There was a single window that looked out onto the street below. Have a seat, she said, gesturing to a chair. Tell me what you've got. I sat down and opened the metal box. I pulled out the ledgers, the photographs, and the documents. I laid them out on the table one by one, explaining each one as I went. I told her about my father's secret life. I told her about the company, about the shell accounts, about Frank Holloway. I told her about the threats, the phone calls, the man in the warehouse. I told her everything. Detective Miller listened without interrupting. She took notes, her pen moving quickly across the page. Her face was unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied the documents on the table. "This is a lot," she said finally. "This is a very serious allegation. Do you have any proof that Frank Holloway is connected to your father's death?" I shook my head. "No, but I know he's connected to everything else. He's the one pulling the strings. He's the one who threatened my husband. He's the one who's been trying to get this evidence." Detective Miller nodded slowly. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "This is going to be difficult. Frank Holloway is a powerful man. He has connections. He has money. He has lawyers. If we go after him, we're going to need more than just your word and your father's ledgers. We're going to need hard evidence." "I have hard evidence," I said, pointing to the ledgers. "This is his signature. These are his transactions. This is proof that he's been laundering money for years." Detective Miller picked up one of the ledgers and flipped through it. "This is a good start," she said. "But we're going to need more. We're going to need witnesses. We're going to need to trace the money. And we're going to need to make sure Frank Holloway doesn't get wind of what we're doing." I nodded. I understood. This was bigger than me. This was bigger than my father. This was about taking down a corrupt system. Detective Miller took the documents and promised to get back to me. I left the office feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. I had done the right thing. I had handed over the evidence. But now I was waiting. And the waiting was the hardest part. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I stayed at home, keeping the doors locked and the blinds drawn. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't go anywhere. I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid of what might be waiting for me outside. And then my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but she kept calling over and over again. Finally, I picked up. "Elisa," she said, her voice urgent. "You need to come home. I need to talk to you. It's important." "I'm not coming home, Mom," I said. "I'm not going to listen to any more lies." "This isn't a lie," she said. "This is about your father. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me didn't want to hear any more secrets. But another part of me, a stubborn part, needed to know the truth. "Fine," I said. "I'll come. But this is the last time, Mom. If you lie to me again, I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with Dad. I'm done with all of it." I drove to my mother's house with a knot in my stomach. The familiar streets looked different now, darker, more menacing. I parked in the driveway and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. My mother was sitting in her armchair, just like she always was. But she looked different. She looked older, frilier. The mask of calm composure she always wore was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded grief. "Sit down, Lisa," she said. "Please." I sat down on the sofa across from her. I didn't say anything. I just waited. My mother took a deep breath. "Your father was a good man," she began. "I know you don't believe that. I know you think he was a liar and a fraud. But he wasn't. He was a man who made a terrible mistake, and he spent his whole life trying to make up for it." "What mistake?" I asked. My mother looked down at her hands. "When he was young, before we were married, he worked for Frank Holloway. He didn't know what Frank was doing at first. He thought he was just a businessman. But then he found out the truth. He found out that Frank was using the company to launder money. And he panicked. He tried to leave, but Frank wouldn't let him. Frank threatened him. Threatened his family. So your father stayed. He stayed, and he helped Frank hide the money because he didn't know what else to do." I stared at her. "So he was a criminal," I said. "He was a money launderer. He was a man who was trapped," my mother said, her voice breaking. "He tried to get out. He tried to go to the authorities. But Frank always found out. He always threatened us. So your father did the only thing he could do. He kept his head down. He kept the company running. And he waited." "Waited for what?" I asked. "Waited for a way out," my mother said. "He was planning to expose Frank. He was planning to turn over all the evidence to the authorities. He had been working on it for years. The ledgers, the photographs, the documents. He was building a case. He wanted to take Frank down. I shook my head. But he died. He had a heart attack. My mother looked at me, her eyes full of tears. No, Lisa. He didn't have a heart attack. He was killed. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. My father had been murdered. The man who had raised me, who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle on my wedding day, had been murdered. How? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. How do you know? Because he told me, my mother said. The night he died. He came home, and he told me that Frank had found out about the evidence. He told me that they were coming for him. He told me to burn the ledgers, to destroy everything. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't destroy his life's work. So I hid them. I hid them in the warehouse. And I waited. Waited for what? I asked. I waited for you, my mother said. I knew you would find them. I knew you would figure it out. You're so much like him, Lisa. You have his stubbornness, his determination. I knew you wouldn't give up until you found the truth. I sat there, staring at my mother. The tears were streaming down my face. My father hadn't been a criminal. He had been a victim. He had been trying to do the right thing, and he had been killed for it. Mom, I said, my voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? My mother reached across the coffee table and took my hands. Because I was afraid, she said. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would go after Frank. I was afraid that they would hurt you, just like they hurt your father. I couldn't bear to lose you too. I held my mother's hands. They were cold and trembling. I looked at her face, at the grief and the guilt etched into every line. She had carried this burden for so long alone. She had lived with the fear, the shame, the loss. And I had been too blinded by my own anger to see it. I pulled my mother into a hug. She felt so fragile in my arms, so small. I'm sorry, Mom, I whispered. I'm sorry I was so angry. I didn't know. Neither did I, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Neither did I. We held each other for a long time, crying together. The secrets of the past had finally been laid bare. The pain was still there, raw and deep. But there was also a sense of relief, a sense of closure. We were finally on the same side. After a while, we pulled apart. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. Mom, I said, I have to tell you something. I gave the evidence to the state attorney general's office. They're building a case against Frank Holloway. My mother's face went pale. Lisa, you shouldn't have done that. Frank Holloway is a dangerous man. He killed your father. He won't hesitate to kill you. I know, I said. But I can't hide from him forever. I have to do this. For Dad. For me. For all of us. My mother stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. You're right, she said. You're right. Your father would have been proud of you. I smiled through my tears. It was the first time I had felt any sense of peace in weeks. As I drove home that evening, the weight of the truth settled over me. My father had been a hero, not a villain. He had been trying to expose the corruption, and he had paid the ultimate price. And now it was up to me to finish what he had started. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would survive. But for the first time in a long time, I knew what I had to do. I had to fight. For my father. For my mother. And for myself. The weeks that followed were a blur of waiting and silence. Detective Miller called me every few days with updates, but there was never much to say. The investigation was moving slowly. Frank Holloway was a ghost, always one step ahead. The ledgers were a treasure trove of evidence, but Holloway's lawyers were fighting every subpoena, every search warrant. They had deep pockets and no scruples. They were dragging their feet, hoping the case would fall apart. I tried to keep busy. I went through the motions of daily life, but it felt hollow. I had lost my job. I had lost my marriage. I had lost the illusion of who my father was, only to regain it in a way that left me more broken than before. The only thing I had left was the fight. And some days, even that didn't feel like enough. Mark's lawyer called me. The divorce proceedings were moving forward. Mark wanted the house. He wanted the car. He wanted half my pension. It was laughable, really. He had betrayed me, abandoned me, and now he was trying to take everything I had left. I told his lawyer I would fight it. I didn't have much fight left in me, But I had enough to refuse to hand over my life to a man who had tried to destroy it. My mother called me every day. She was still in the hospital, but the doctors said she was making progress. She was talking more, eating more. The depression was lifting slowly. She still didn't want to talk about the past, but she was starting to talk about the future. She talked about planting a garden. She talked about going to the beach. She talked about coming to visit me. It gave me hope, fragile and tentative, but hope nonetheless. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the television without really seeing it. The news was on. Something about a local election, something about the weather. I was about to turn it off when the screen changed. A reporter was standing outside a federal courthouse, and the ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking: Federal Indictments in Money Laundering Investigation." My heart stopped. I turned up the volume. Sources confirm that a federal grand jury has indicted 6 individuals in connection with a massive money laundering scheme. The investigation, which has been ongoing for several months, centers on a network of shell companies used to funnel money to political candidates and private interests. Among those indicted is businessman Frank Holloway, who is expected to turn himself in tomorrow. I stared at the screen. Frank Holloway. He had been indicted. It was finally happening. The case was moving forward. The reporter continued. The investigation is a joint effort between state and federal authorities. According to sources, a key piece of evidence came from a trove of documents provided by a private citizen. The documents are believed to have been compiled by an associate of the accused, who was reportedly murdered to prevent the information from coming to light. My father's face flashed in my mind. Arthur Redmond. The quiet man who tended his roses and paid his bills in cash. The man who had been murdered to keep his secrets buried. He was finally getting justice. I called Detective Miller immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Did you see the news?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I saw it," she said. "It's happening, Lisa. We've got him. The federal charges are just the beginning. We're going to bury him." I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for everything." "You did the hard part," she said. "You brought us the evidence. You had the courage to come forward." "That's not nothing." We talked for a few more minutes, but I barely heard what she said. My mind was racing. My father's killer was finally going to face justice. The secret that had haunted my family for decades was finally going to be exposed. The next day, the story dominated the news. Frank Holloway had turned himself in. He was arraigned and denied bail. He was considered a flight risk. The judge agreed. He would stay in custody until the trial. I watched the coverage from my living room. There were pictures of Holloway being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. He looked older than I remembered from the photographs, grayer, smaller somehow. The power he had wielded for so long seemed to have evaporated. He was just a man now, a man in a suit who was facing the consequences of his actions. The trial was scheduled to begin in 6 months. It seemed like an eternity, but I knew it was fast for a case of this magnitude. I told myself I could wait. I had waited this long. I could wait a little longer. But the waiting was harder than I had expected. Every day felt like a year. I was restless. I was anxious. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I found myself pacing the house, looking out the windows, jumping at every sound. One afternoon, my mother called. She was out of the hospital now, living in a small apartment near the beach. The doctors had recommended a change of scenery. She said it was helping. "Lisa," she said, her voice warm. I was thinking, why don't you come visit me? A change of scenery might do you good too. I hesitated. I didn't want to leave. I felt like I had to be here, close to the courthouse, close to the action. But the truth was, there was nothing I could do. The wheels of justice were turning, and I was just a spectator. "Okay, Mom," I said. "I'll come." I packed a bag and drove to the coast. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful. Green hills, blue sky, the occasional glimpse of the ocean. It was the first time in months that I had felt anything close to peace. My mother's apartment was small, but it was cozy. She had decorated it with things from her old house, familiar things that made me feel like I was home. She hugged me when I arrived, and it was the first time in a long time that her embrace didn't feel stiff or guarded. It's good to see you, she said. You look like you've lost weight. I've been stressed, I said. It's been a lot. I know, she said. But you're here now. Let's just relax. Let's just be together. We spent the next few days doing nothing. We went for walks on the beach. We cooked simple meals. We watched old movies on her small television. It was quiet, but it was exactly what I needed. One evening, we were sitting on the balcony, watching the sunset. The sky was on fire, shades of orange and pink and gold. I had never seen anything so beautiful. Mom, I said, breaking the silence. Do you think Dad knew? Do you think he knew that his evidence would eventually bring Frank Holloway down? My mother was quiet for a long moment. I think he hoped, she said finally. I think he hoped that someone would find the truth. I think he hoped that his sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. I nodded. It wasn't. It wasn't in vain. My mother reached over and took my hand. I'm proud of you, Lisa, she said. You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger. Your father would be proud of you too. I squeezed her hand. Thanks, Mom. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I didn't dream about the warehouse. I didn't dream about the man in the dark coat. I just slept. The next day, my phone rang. It was Detective Miller. Elisa, she said. I have some news. Frank Holloway's lawyers have filed a motion to dismiss the case. They're claiming that the evidence is inadmissible because it was obtained illegally. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What? That's not true. I found the evidence in a warehouse that my father owned. It was legally obtained. I know, she said. But they're arguing that the documents were stolen from their client. They're claiming that your father was working for Holloway and that he took the documents without permission. They're trying to discredit the entire case. How likely are they to win? I asked. It's a long shot, she said. But it's going to delay the trial. It's going to complicate things. I just wanted to warn you. I thanked her and hung up. I sat on the balcony, staring out at the ocean, and I felt the hope I had been clinging to slip away. My mother came out and sat beside me. What's wrong? She asked. I told her. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Your father once told me something, she said. He said that the truth is like a rock. It might get buried, it might get covered in mud, but it's always there. It never goes away. It just waits. I looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying that the truth is on our side, she said. Frank Holloway can try to bury it. He can try to cover it up. But it's still there. And eventually, it will come out. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had felt in months. You're right, I said. You're right. I stayed at the beach for another week. When I came home, I was ready to face whatever came next. The court case was delayed, but I didn't let it break me. I got a job at a local bookstore. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much. But it was honest work, and it kept me busy. I started seeing my mother more often. We went to dinner once a week. We talked on the phone every day. The distance between us, the emotional distance that had been there for so long, was slowly closing. And then, one day, I got a call from Detective Miller. Lisa, she said. The motion to dismiss was denied. The judge ruled that the evidence is admissible. The trial is going to start next month. I stood in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, and I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Relief. Joy. Exhaustion. It was finally happening. Frank Holloway was going to face justice. Thank you, I said. Thank you for everything. I'll keep you updated, she said. But for now, just try to stay strong. We're almost there. I hung up and sat down at the kitchen table. I looked at the clock. It was 6:17. The time I used to set the oven for dinner. The time Mark used to come home. The time my life had changed forever. But things were different now. I was different now. I had been through the darkness, and I had come out the other side. I was still standing. I was still fighting. And I knew, deep in my heart, that I was going to win. The trial was held in a federal courthouse downtown. It was a grand old building with marble columns and high ceilings. I had walked past it 100 times, but I had never been inside. The morning of the first day, I arrived early. I wanted to make sure I got a seat. I wanted to be there when Frank Holloway walked in. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Lawyers shuffled papers at the front. A group of spectators, mostly older people like me, had gathered to watch the proceedings. They were drawn by the drama, the intrigue, the spectacle of a powerful man being brought down. I found a seat in the third row and sat down. I didn't have to wait long. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge walked in, a stern-faced woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She took her seat at the bench and nodded to the lawyers. And then the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and Frank Holloway was led in. He looked smaller than I remembered from the photographs. He was wearing a gray suit, a little too big for him, and his hair was thin and gray. He moved slowly, like a man who had already been broken. He sat down at the defense table and looked straight ahead. He didn't look at anyone in the gallery. He didn't look at me. I felt a surge of anger. This was the man who had killed my father. This was the man who had threatened my family. He looked so ordinary, so unremarkable. It was hard to believe he had caused so much pain. The trial lasted for 3 weeks. The prosecution presented its case methodically, laying out the evidence piece by piece. They showed the ledgers, the photographs, the bank statements. They called witnesses, experts who explained how money laundering worked, how shell companies were used to hide the flow of money. I was called to the stand on the second week. I was nervous. My hands were shaking. But I walked to the witness box, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me about my father. I told them about Arthur Redmond, the quiet man who tended his roses and paid his bills in cash. I told them about his desk, his neat handwriting, his meticulous records. I told them about the warehouse, the ledgers, the photographs. I told them about the phone calls, the threats, the man in the dark coat. The defense lawyer tried to tear me apart. He asked me if I was angry at my father. He asked me if I had taken the documents without permission. He asked me if I had any proof that my father was working against Frank Holloway. He was trying to make me look like a bitter daughter, a woman out for revenge. But I didn't let him break me. I answered his questions calmly. I told the truth. And when I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a sense of relief. I had done what I came to do. The trial ended with the closing arguments. The prosecutor spoke for over an hour, laying out the case in painstaking detail. The defense lawyer argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that my father had been a willing participant, that Frank Holloway was just a businessman who had been caught in a bad situation. The judge sent the jury out to deliberate. I spent the next 3 days in a state of anxious waiting. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just sat at home, staring at the phone, waiting for news. On the third day, the jury reached a verdict. I rushed to the courthouse, my heart pounding. I found my seat in the gallery and waited. The jury filed in, their faces solemn. The judge asked the foreman to read the verdict. On count 1, conspiracy to commit money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 3, obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. The rest of the verdict was lost in the noise of the courtroom. The reporters were shouting. The spectators were clapping. Frank Holloway was sitting at the defense table, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who had finally run out of luck. I sat in my seat, the tears streaming down my face. It was over. It was finally over. Frank Holloway was going to prison. My father had been avenged. After the trial, I went to my mother's apartment. She had been watching the news coverage on television. When I walked in, she was sitting on the sofa, a box of tissues in her lap. "Mom," I said. "He was found guilty. On all counts." My mother looked up at me. Her face was wet with tears. "I know," she said. "I saw it on the news." She stood up and walked toward me. We hugged each other, holding on tight. The years of secrets and lies had finally come to an end. The weight that had been pressing down on us for so long was finally lifted. "Your father would be proud of you," my mother said. I smiled. He would be proud of both of us. The weeks that followed were quiet. Frank Holloway was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The other defendants in the case, the ones who had been his accomplices, also received prison sentences. The scandal had damaged their reputations, but they were rich men. They had resources. They would survive. I didn't care about them. I only cared about the truth. And the truth had finally come out. Mark came to see me a few weeks after the trial. He looked older, thinner. The weight of the past few months had taken its toll on him. He stood on my doorstep, his hands in his pockets, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Lisa, he said. Can we talk? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. Part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. Come in, I said. He walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa. I sat across from him, my arms crossed over my chest. I'm sorry, he said. For everything. For what I did. For what I didn't do. I was wrong, Lisa. I was so wrong. I looked at him. Why are you here, Mark? He took a deep breath. I'm here because I want to make things right. I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't take back the pain I caused. But I want to try. I want to be a better man. I shook my head. Mark, I don't think you can just come back and make things right. You betrayed me. You left me. You took everything I had and threw it away. He looked down at his hands. I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm just asking for a chance to make things right. To help you. To be there for you. I was quiet for a long moment. I thought about everything we had been through together. The good times and the bad. The laughter and the tears. The love and the betrayal. I can't forget what happened, I said finally. But I can try to forgive you. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time. But I'll try. Mark nodded. His eyes were wet. Thank you. That's all I ask. He left a few minutes later. I watched him walk down the driveway, get into his car, and drive away. I didn't know if I would ever be able to trust him again. I didn't know if we would ever be able to rebuild what we had lost. But I knew that I was done carrying the anger. I was done carrying the resentment. It was time to let go. I started working at the coffee shop a few weeks later. It was a small place in a quiet part of town. The customers were mostly regulars, older folks who came in for their morning coffee and their afternoon chats. It was simple work, honest work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what I needed. My mother visited me often. She would sit at the counter, a cup of tea in her hands, and we would talk about nothing in particular. The weather. The garden. The neighbors. It was the kind of mundane conversation that I had once taken for granted. Now I cherished it. One afternoon, I was washing dishes behind the counter when my mother walked in. She was wearing a new dress, a bright blue one that brought out the color of her eyes. You look nice, Mom. I said. Thank you, dear, she said. I have a date. I dropped the plate I was holding. It clattered into the sink, but it didn't break. A date with who? She smiled. A man from my building. His name is Gerald. He's a retired math teacher. He's very kind. I stared at her. Mom, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. She nodded. I know. I didn't think I would ever be happy again. But I am. I'm happy. I walked around the counter and hugged her. She hugged me back, holding me tight. I'm happy too, Mom, I said. I'm happy too. A few months later, I closed on the coffee shop. I had saved up enough money to buy it outright. It was a small place, but it was mine. I painted the walls a warm cream color and hung up photos of the local area. I added a few comfortable chairs and a bookshelf filled with books I had read. It was cozy and inviting. It felt like home. My mother came to the grand opening. Mark came too. He was still trying, still showing up, still trying to rebuild the trust he had broken. I was letting him. Slowly. Carefully. The shop was full of people that day. Friends, neighbors, regulars. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was happy. It felt like a celebration. A celebration of new beginnings. A celebration of survival. Later that evening, after the last customer had left, I sat at one of the tables and looked around the shop. I thought about everything I had been through. The betrayal. The loss. The pain. I thought about my father, about the man I had known and the man I had come to know. I thought about my mother, about the strength she had shown. I thought about Mark, about the long road ahead. And I thought about myself. The woman I had become. The woman who had faced the darkness and come out the other side. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have a glamorous life. But I had something better. I had peace. I had purpose. I had the love of the people around me. That was more than enough. That was everything. The last customer left just before closing time. I locked the door behind her and turned off the neon sign. The coffee shop fell quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft drip of the espresso machine. I wiped down the counter, stacked the clean cups, and counted the till. It had been a good day. A steady stream of familiar faces, warm conversations, and the smell of fresh coffee. It was simple, honest work. I took a seat at the corner table, the one with a view of the street. The night was clear, the stars bright overhead. I looked at the photos on the wall, pictures of the neighborhood, of the park, of the old rail yards. My father's warehouse was gone now, torn down to make way for a new development. The past was being erased, brick by brick. But the truth remained. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal of my father's secret. The loss of my job and my marriage. The fear of the man in the dark coat. The fight for justice that had nearly broken me. I had been lost in a maze of lies, searching for a way out. And now I was sitting in my own shop, looking at my own reflection in the window, and I finally understood what I had found. I had found myself. Mark called me later that evening. He was still in town, still trying. He was working at a small accounting firm, rebuilding his life the same way I was rebuilding mine. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important. The weather. His mother. My mother's new boyfriend. It was easy, comfortable. Not like before. But maybe that was okay. Maybe trust was something that grew slowly, like a garden, watered with patience and time. My mother had called me earlier. She was happy. Genuinely happy. She and Gerald were planning a trip to the coast next month. She sounded like a different woman, lighter, freer. The secrets that had weighed her down for so long had finally been released. She was ready to live again. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty street. The streetlights cast warm pools of light on the pavement. The world was quiet, peaceful. I thought about my father. I thought about the man who had raised me, the man who had been so much more than I ever knew. He had been trapped, just like me. He had been fighting, just like me. And in the end, he had found a way to break free. I turned off the lights and locked up the shop. I walked home through the quiet streets, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The house was dark when I got there, but I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, looking up at the stars. It had been a long year. A year of pain and loss and fear. But it had also been a year of growth and strength and resilience. I had faced the darkness and I had come out the other side. I had lost so much, but I had also gained something precious. I had gained the truth. And I had gained myself. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The air was cool and clean. I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally accepted that it didn't need to be. I had survived. I had won. And that was enough.